Hello, colleagues and students of psychology. We're really delighted to welcome you to this online careers event. And we are the committee for the BPS East of England branch, and this is the first event in hopefully a series of career events. We wanted to do something a little bit different from the normal careers event, which often would tell you about how the path you need to take to get onto your chosen career. We wanted to do something different and put you in a position where you might be able to imagine yourself in your future career and what a day in your life might look like. And because that is often something that when we ourselves have entered into our careers, we say that we didn't know what our working day would look like. And that's what we want to provide you with today. We've asked 4 experts in psychology, 4 people who have psychology backgrounds, who now have interesting careers working with children, to come and talk to us today about what a day in their work life might look like. So before we ask the first speaker to start telling us about what a day in her life is like, I'd like to talk to you about how you can interact with us. So we really want your questions for the speakers, and that's what the panel is here for, to give you a taste of their lives and to answer your questions. So as each speaker is talking, it would be really helpful if you can ask your questions during their section. So if you see on your screen down towards the bottom, you'll see the Q&A button. You should be able to type in questions live there. These will be monitored by the committee members. So if you're asking a question during a particular speaker's section, our committee members will be noting those down and will ask them to the panelists at the end of the session. So indeed, we'll have all 4 panelists speaking, all 4 different career types speaking in a row. I'll introduce them to you briefly. And then at the end of those 4 10 to 15 minute sections, our committee members will have noted your questions and ask them to the panelists. So please do remember to ask those questions when people are speaking. The other request I would have to make it nicer for you is if you click onto speaker view, you'll just be able to see the person who's speaking rather than gallery view. It's a nicer viewing experience. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker to give you a taste of what a day in her life is like working with children. This speaker is a former student of mine, a former psychology student from ARU. Her name is Jess West, and she works as a teacher teaching A-level psychology. So Jess, over to you.
Thanks very much, Helen. So hi everyone, as Helen has wonderfully introduced me, my name is Jess and I am a 6th form teacher in Cambridge. So I teach A-level psychology, but I have also taught some A-level sociology as well for a couple of years. At the moment in this new academic year, I have 6 classes. I have 3 year 13 classes and 3 year 12 classes, and I'm only teaching psychology this year, no sociology. So I have about 82 students in total, which is a fair number compared to the past few years I've been teaching. Psychology is an incredibly popular A-level subject, and some of you watching may well be taking it, but it's one of the most popular A-level subjects across A-levels. So I came to teaching quite unusually. It was 1 year after I graduated from finishing a degree in psychology at ARU, and I took a fairly unusual route. I began teaching without teaching qualification or without experience, but as I started my first day, I got used to the structure, I got used to the system, and I had some amazing colleagues who came alongside me and showed me the ropes and what to do and how to teach. After about a year of teaching, I did take a level 5 diploma in education and training, and eventually became a qualified teacher. So from my first day of teaching, which was fairly terrifying, but I soon got used to it, it's now something that I absolutely love to do. So a typical day for me as a psychology teacher. It begins with about a 20-minute cycle from where I live to the 6th form where I teach. I quite appreciate the cycle ride. It's a good way to wake me up, especially on the fresh autumn and winter mornings that we're going to be encountering soon. I arrive at work just after 8 o'clock, say hi to my colleagues, go to the staff kitchen, make myself a cup of tea, a very necessary way to start the day as a teacher. I go into my classroom. I have a classroom to myself in the 6th form area, and I put my laptop on and check my timetable for the day. Every day is different, so some days I'll be teaching 4 classes, some 5, some 3, so I just want to check that I know who I'm teaching and when I'm teaching them. I also check that all of my lessons are prepared and any resources that I need to use or the students will need to use are printed out, so that I hopefully don't have to run out to the printer room in the middle of a lesson to print the resources, although that has happened. At 8:40, the school day is fairly structured, and at 8:40, I'll usually have a tutee meeting. So I'm responsible for a tutor group, which is made up of about 16 students, some from year 12 and some from year 13. And after we've sort of met each other during the first week or two of the academic year, I will then have a meeting with each of them on a one-to-one basis once every half term. And this is just to check in with how they are, especially within the first autumn term, find out how the year 13s are doing with writing their personal statements for applying for UCAS or apprenticeships. So at 8:40 I'll have my tutee meeting, or sometimes I wait for them to turn up and I continue waiting and I continue waiting and they sometimes don't turn up. So I might send them an email to remind them of the meeting that we should have had and then make another one with them. So I'll take some notes from our meeting and log it onto the system so that their subject teachers and heads of year are able to see the things that we've been able to talk about. 9 o'clock then comes round and I start with period 1, my first lesson of the day. Honestly, a period 1 lesson, the punctuality to that lesson for 9 o'clock often depends very much on the type of class. Some classes will sort of dribble in at about 9:10, and other classes will be there very promptly at 9:05. So it depends on the type of class. So let's say I have a year 13 class. I take a register, I give out the handouts necessary for the lesson, and we start our lesson. And we're looking at research methods aspect of psychology. We're looking at significance and probability. This is a lesson that I actually taught today, and sometimes students find it a little bit challenging, so it's one that I like to take quite a long time over to explain each of the different concepts really clearly. I often field quite a lot of questions and try and encourage questions from a lesson like this. 9 o'clock lesson finishes after an hour, and so the 10 o'clock lesson comes around very quickly. This is period 2, and so I'm teaching now a year 12 class. I'm teaching them on different types of conformity. We're looking at social influence. So I start to introduce them to the different types of conformity, what it means to be compliant, what it means to internalize other people's views. And partway through the lesson, whilst they're doing a task, I realize I did indeed forget to print something. So I set them a task in line with what I've planned for the lesson, quickly head out to the printer. Unfortunately, there's no paper in the printer, so I go to the office to fill up the printer with paper and hope that the class is still focused on their task. These are sort of the everyday, day-to-day sort of problems that you run into sometimes as a teacher. But I get back to the class and everybody's still working just fine. 11 o'clock comes around and period 2 lesson has finished and it's break time. A half an hour break from 11 till 11:30. And this could be all sorts of things. So I definitely make sure that I make myself a cup of coffee. I might make one for my colleagues if I have some time. Check and respond to some emails, maybe flag up emails to respond to later. Sometimes I get an email and a bit of a longer response is needed. So I'll just flag them up so I can look at them at the end of the day. A student turns up, knocks on my door to the classroom and asks if I can help them with their personal statement. So I sit down with them and we take pen to paper and have a look at making some amendments, editing it, and things that they can add in. 11:30 is period 3. I don't have any lessons during period 3 on this day. I've chosen to outline for you. So I choose to use it to prepare for the next day or sometimes the next week. Perhaps I've got a handout that I would use that I actually didn't work quite so well last time I used it, so I want to use the time to be able to improve that. But although it's a whole hour to try and get some planning and preparation done, that hour goes incredibly quickly. And by about 12:30, period 4 is starting and my second lot of year 13s for the day are heading into the class. So sometimes I will repeat a lesson in a day, but this day we're doing something slightly different with this group of Year 13s. They have chosen, they are doing a research methods project. So as part of teaching the psychology A-level, students have an opportunity to design and conduct their own piece of research. It's a fantastic way of students being able to get to grips with what research methods actually are, see them in practice, put them into practice, and experience for themselves the difficulties and the pitfalls of actually being a psychologist researcher and carrying out such studies. So I work with the groups, I go around, they're doing it in groups rather than independently, and I go around the groups to support them with their project design. That's what they're doing in this lesson. So I try and help them with what experimental method they might be using, try and encourage them to think about how ethical their study is. One group wants to do something that I don't think will necessarily pass the ethics board that is myself and the other psychology teacher that I teach alongside. We check their projects before they actually run them. But the class goes relatively well, and by the end of it, students are quite happy with what they are going to be doing, quite excited about being able to use some of the sixth form students outside of their classes as their participants to conduct a study on. 1:30 brings lunchtime, and I run different clubs at lunchtime. So I run a Makaton club, which is a type of sign language. So I have a ton of students pile into the classroom and we learn signing together, sometimes to songs, sometimes just to learn a different way of communicating with each other. And I try and have a bite or two of lunch through teaching that. 2:05 brings the final period of the day. And this is a repeat of my period 1 of the day. So this was the Year 13 class that I had. I have got my 3rd Year 13 class of the day, and we're doing significance and probability again. So I just use the same slides, the same resources. It's all already there. It's just a different class. And just because it's the same resources and it's the same slides doesn't necessarily mean that I teach it in the same way. There might be students there who need a little bit more time to go over things, or then it may be a class where the students are picking it up incredibly quickly, in which case they can do sort of additional tasks and have time to perhaps put some of their learning into some practice questions. After the class, I realise that there's a student in the class that I perhaps need to speak to, so I ask them to stay behind. There's someone who constantly hands in homework late, and so I just have a conversation with them, making them aware of sort of the different steps that might need to be taken. If this keeps happening, I'll need to contact their parents. If things don't change with them, then I might need to take it to faculty intervention. If things still don't change, then it's the head of sixth form then gets involved. They seem to take the conversation quite well and promise that their next piece of homework will be handed in on time. So 3:05 is really the end of the students' school day or college day, but it's not quite the end of mine. I respond to some of the flagged emails that I looked at earlier in the day during break time and take my time responding to a couple of parents' emails and a couple of emails from members of my faculty. Then at about 3:30, we have a faculty meeting. So the different subjects within my faculty include, obviously, we have psychology, sociology, government and politics, criminology, law. And so we gather together as staff members and we have a particular focus when we have a faculty meeting. And in this one, we're talking about how to create a writing structure. We want to try and improve students' writing, especially for the essay questions that they're given in exams. So we discuss and share with each other what are our different writing structures that we use and that we can create to try and help students structure their answers in such a way that they're getting maximum number of marks, but also writing a little more coherently. It's a good meeting. We go away with plenty of ideas and a couple of tasks to do and bring back for next time. So by 4:30, it's home time and I'm ready to go home. I head home back by about 10 to 5. At 5 o'clock, after I've made myself another cup of tea, I have about 60 essays to mark. They're all due in a couple of days' time. So I sit down and I start marking the essays. But honestly, marking essays is fairly tedious. It takes quite a long time. So I'm generally one for procrastinating when it comes to marking. So I might mark some essays and then I might get up and do something else. So it takes quite a long time. So it takes me until about 8 o'clock to finish the essays that I've been marking. And by that time, it's time to make dinner. So I make dinner and decide to have a little bit of time to myself. Might watch an episode of my favourite programme at the moment. That is the psychological sort of programme of Lie to Me, which is brilliant. If you've never watched it, you might want to look it up. And then 10 o'clock, it's time to prepare for the next day, work out what clothes I'm wearing, work out what my lunch is going to be, and then finally fall into bed relatively tired and ready to pretty much repeat the process again and the day for the next day. So I love teaching psychology. It's something that I am really passionate about. It's a subject that I absolutely love. I loved studying it at A-level. I loved studying it at degree level. So to share something, to sort of pass on knowledge and understanding about a subject that I'm passionate about is incredibly rewarding. And I see teaching as not just sort of passing on of knowledge, but also helping to shape students' understanding about themselves because of what the subject is, but also about the world around them. And to see students change from starting year 12 to then the year 13 students, they have something a little bit different about them that I think possibly, I'd like to think that it's come from studying psychology and gaining that understanding of themselves and of people around them. So that is a typical day in the life of an A-level psychology teacher. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Jess. That was a really great insight into a day in the life of a teacher of psychology. Thank you so much. We're now going to ask Miriam Craddock and Richard to share with us what a day in the life of an educational and child psychologist is. So Miriam Craddock is an educational and child psychologist who works with families and teaching staff around improving relationships with children. She also works as a tutor on the EdSci programme at UEA, and she is joined by a trainee educational psychologist, Richard Smith. So please, Miriam and Richard, please feel free to introduce yourselves.
Hello. Just going to start sharing screen. And hopefully Miriam will come on.
We're just waiting for Miriam to unmute her mic and join us in the presentation. Miriam, are you there?
I am, yeah. Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. Yes. Hello, good evening. Can you hear me? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the role of the educational psychologist. I've got a little bit of a flavour of what the day in the life of an educational psychologist looks like. And Richard is one of the students at the University of East Anglia, is kindly going to tell you a little bit about the course up at UEA from first-hand experience. So if we look at the next slide, just to tell you briefly kind of what we're going to be covering. So if Richard, if you can move it on, we're going to think about like what is the role of an EP. So we'll do a little bit of introduction because people may not know what an educational psychologist, the role of an EP is. We'll then look at the day in the life of an educational psychologist, and I will also share my journey of becoming an educational psychologist with you and tell you a little bit about, if you're interested in the profession, what you can do to enter the profession. And then there'll be opportunity for questions. If you've got questions, encourage you to write those in the chat as we go along, and then they'll be picked up at the end. So do comment in the chat as we go along. Thank you, Richard. So I'm just going to let Richard tell you a little bit about the profession. So Richard, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about your experience of training as an educational psychologist and what it means to you.
Yeah, so of course, educational psychologists use assessment, monitoring and evaluation to support schools and support children and young people within the schools. It's a really essential role. In a recent paper published in March 2019, conducted by Warwick University, the Educational Psychology Workforce Research Report identified how important educational psychologists are in promoting the social and emotional mental health of children and young people within school and the community, in line with SEND practices. So for me, being an educational psychologist is quite a diverse role, really, and there's lots to do. We'll just move on.
Thank you, Richard. So what do we educational psychologists do? We work with children and young people. We work with children and young people across the age range between 0 to 25 with special educational needs, their parents and carers and their families. We work in schools, that's nurseries, primary schools, secondary schools, colleges, specialist residential settings. And we work with lots of different professionals. So there's some examples there on the slide, as you can see. So we aim to improve the outcomes for children and young people in conjunction with their families, very much in partnership with their families and those who know them best in schools. So Richard's going to talk you through the next slide.
As we've kind of touched on already, educational psychologists apply a wide range of psychology with a variety of partners to improve social, learning and emotional health outcomes for children and young people. We're concerned with empowering and working with others in community contexts such as schools, colleges, community centres, all sorts of places where children and young people and families might engage. So can be quite diverse in that way. Consultation is the main way that we as educational psychologists work with others to effect change. This involves gathering the views of young people, their parents, teachers, significant others, also other professionals involved. So can be from wide variety, from doctors to speech and language therapists to occupational therapists, talking to lots of different people all the time. And together we use problem solving and solution orientated approaches to promote and improve the emotional, social and learning outcomes for children and young people. Okay, just
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. So I'd like you just to imagine for a moment, just to look at this image, and wherever you are, I just want you to think about this image of an iceberg. And I want you to think about when an educational psychologist receives a referral, a key question that they often ask is like, why this child? Why now? So I'd like you to look at this image, and I'd like you to think about what's on the surface or above the water is kind of everything that you receive when you receive the referral. So you might be receiving a referral, for example, about a child who's anxious at school, running out of the classroom. And on the surface, so what are you seeing above the surface? You're seeing, what's happening, what are the events that are going on around that child, what kind of patterns of behaviour, what's happening in that child's life, what are the trends and what changes there may have been recently in that child's life. And then under the surface, I just want you to kind of now look underneath the iceberg. And that's kind of like a psychologist. We're thinking, what do we not yet know? What we may need to find out? Who do we need to ask? We're needing to kind of cast the net wide, and we're needing to think about who is it that we need to speak to? Maybe people in the school who know that child best. What are the relationships that they have with their family? What are the relationships they have with other children or young people in their school community? We're trying to kind of understand, what are their mental models about the world? What values, beliefs and assumptions do they have, and what are their views about education as well? And we're trying to kind of draw all that information together and think about what might be going on for this child or young person when we get a referral. So I'll just show you very briefly on the next slide, a model that we think about when we understand behaviour is an interaction. So it's both the person, that's the young person, and the situation, it's the school. We're looking at those two things in conjunction, and we're trying to think about, is it something in the learning environment that needs to change? Is it something at home that's changed? Is it something at school? Or how can we work in collaboration and in partnership with others to improve the experience for that child in their context? So the next slide is another image, and I just want you to look at this image for a moment, wherever you are. The image now is driving the car. So you're thinking about what it feels like when you are in the car, and just take a moment to reflect on how it feels when you're sitting and you're holding the steering wheel and you're steering. So this kind of gentle turning is the kind of analogy I want to use around the role of an educational psychologist. So gently working with others to try and mediate or turn or make some small change in a positive direction, to change the direction of travel for that child or young person in partnership with who they work with. So I hope those are helpful images that you can kind of hold on to when you think about the role of an educational psychologist. We're trying to mediate change and promote positive outcomes in partnership with those who know the child or young person best. So on the next slide, I think Richard's just going to put up, you've got a kind of a repertoire of the kind of the role of an educational psychologist, and some of the the areas that you may be less familiar with. As Richard said at the beginning, the workforce report, there's quite a range of skills that we have, and I'll just let you have a look at the slide, and you can see there we've got advocacy role, we have a therapeutic role, and we have a community role. Very much that's something we're developing in our profession. We have a traded role, and we often provide support to others at times of need or crisis. So when there's an extra need for additional support, we have a specialist role. We work, in conjunction with other specialists in different contexts, in different teams. And as Richard said already, we work with others to empower children and young people in partnership with their families who know them best, and those who work around them in the school. So I'm just going to ask Richard to share the next slide now. So what kind of qualifications might you need if you want to become an educational psychologist? So you can see there, you need a psychology degree, and you also will then need to go on and do some further qualification, which is what Richard's doing currently at University of East Anglia. As a trainee educational psychologist, you go on to complete a doctorate. So currently you enter the programme having had experience of working with children and young people. So if you want to work with children, this may be a profession for you, but you need to have some experience before you enter educational psychology, and you can get that experience in working in education, health, social care, or youth justice, or childcare. I'm just going to ask Richard to tell you the experience that he had before he applied to the course.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. So sorry, I just had a little bit of feedback there. My experience was mainly in health services, but they were joint health and social care services, supporting people with learning disabilities throughout the age ranges. So quite different to the typical idea of being a teacher. There's lots of, like Miriam said, there's lots of different ways that you can get the experience that these courses are looking for.
Thank you, Richard. So if you just go on to the next slide now, I'm going to tell you about a typical day. We'll go into the next one after that. So a typical day in the life of an educational psychologist. I've got some images there. You will be, obviously it's lockdown at the minute, so we're not doing this, but when we're out of lockdown, a typical day is going into a setting. You can see an image there in the middle of the screen in a classroom. You might do an observation in the morning. And then you may be meeting, you can see the top image there with, the pupil themselves and gathering their views. So you're, starting to understand, what's going on. Obviously, I've got different ages of different images of children on the screen, but it's just to give you a bit of a flavour. And then, as an educational psychologist, you may be doing some direct assessment with a child. You see the image at the bottom there that gives an illustration of actually doing some direct work with the child. And then at the end of the day, you're kind of putting all that information together, and you're trying to write a psychological formulation based on the information that you've gathered as to what's actually going on for that child in their learning environment, and a description of their needs, and what kind of adjustments need to be put in place to improve their experience of education. So I'm going to tell you a typical day in my life now. That was just a flavour of any educational psychologist. So the next slide, which Rich is going to put up, is a little bit more personalised to my role. So this is my role in Cambridgeshire. A typical day for me is driving to a nursery. I might in the morning go to a preschool or nursery and observe a 4-year-old child who's got a diagnosis of autism. This child has English as an additional language, and his parents are Tamil speakers. And then I'm working with the family in conjunction with an interpreter to gather the views of the parents. So I'm working as an advocate there to enable their voice to be heard, and then working with the staff to support a transition meeting for that little boy to move up to school. So actually this was an example of a piece of work that I did in one of our preschool settings, and feeding into one of the feeder primary schools in Cambridgeshire just before lockdown. And then in the afternoon, on this particular day, I went to do a home visit in the same town. It's a town locally that some of you may know, and I did a joint home visit with a social worker. This is for a young mum who has a child on a child protection plan, and we were working using an intervention called video interaction guidance. So using that intervention to work therapeutically with this mum. That was something that came through as a referral from social care to support this mum in building and strengthening the relationship she has with her baby, and then working together in partnership with the social worker. So another example of a different type of work that we do as educational psychologists. And then I drive back to the office, have a cup of tea, feeling fairly tired by now, have a break, and a meeting with colleagues, working together to plan a workshop and thinking about a conference which is involved with other services across the Eastern region. So yeah, just a typical example. The last couple of slides, I'm just going to show you my journey. So some of you who may be interested in a career in educational psychology may be interested to know the kind of experience that I had for myself, as I entered the profession. I was a qualified teacher before then training on the doctoral programme at University College London. I've worked as an assistant educational psychologist and as an educational psychologist across the Eastern Region services, so both in Essex, Cambridgeshire, and most recently I've joined the tutor team up at University of East Anglia, which has just been an amazing opportunity to give something back and to work in a higher education setting, and to be able to to feed into the learning of others who are coming into the profession. So that's kind of where Richard's actually in the first year. And Richard, you may just want to finish off just by adding something from your own experience of what it's like entering the profession. So I think if we just whiz over the next couple of slides, and I'll just ask you, I put on just aware of time, there are some of the places I've worked and some of the people who've inspired me. I've put my mum on there. The middle picture is my sister-in-law, who's a social worker, and somebody who's a mentor to me, who's also a psychologist. The next slide is, there you go, you can see me training at University College London. So if you're interested in a career, there are many places that you can train. The next slide tells you all the different places that you can train around the country. If you're interested in entering the profession, Richard's just going to tell you a little bit about that and the course at UEA before we finish.
So I'll briefly mention that all of this information is on the AEP website, which is the Association of Educational Psychologists. So if you search for AEP and find the Association of Educational Psychologists, you'll find this information. There's lots of different universities, and they all have slightly different views on psychology and its application within the discipline of educational psychology, which is really good because it keeps the services diverse and it keeps the profession diverse. But what I would say is look carefully at all the different universities and to get a sense of which university is right for you and the psychology you want to practice in your future career, if this is something that interests you. So UEA is the newest course in the UK. The first one for quite a while, and it's really exciting course. It's very interested in social justice, ethical and social responsibility, and reflective and reflexive practice. Now, obviously, in educational psychology and applied psychology, we talk about the scientist practitioner role, and the course at UEA is really quite interesting in the fact that it uses critical psychology. So thinking about where the psychologies come from, when it was developed, how it was developed, to really make us think about the type of psychologist we want to be. And that was something that really excited me. And social justice is something that's particularly important to me, and has been important to me throughout my working. And ethical and social responsibility is something that all applied psychologists are really passionate about, and reflexive and reflective practice is a key aspect of maintaining that ethical and social responsibility. So that's that.
Thank you
for listening.
So, yeah, thank you for listening. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Miriam and Richard. We really appreciate that. And I don't know about anybody else, but I will now forever think of educational psychologists spending their days hunting icebergs and pulling wheelies in the car park after those images. Thank you for that.
Hopefully not wheelies.
Yeah, gentle turning. Yes.
Yeah, gentle turning.
Thank you, Miriam. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Frances Karani, who wants to tell us about her work, a day in her life as a family practitioner. So Frances works directly with families that have complex needs as a family counsellor. And there's a lot of other aspects to her role as well, which she'd like to tell you about.
Hello, everyone. I am going to share my screen here. Okay, so my name is Frances Korani, and I work for Cambridgeshire County Council as a district family worker in one of my roles. And in my other job, I work as a family and couple relationship counsellor with Relate Cambridge. And
Frances, sorry to
yes,
interrupt. Would you just mind putting your PowerPoint on slideshow, please?
slideshow, yes, indeed.
That would be fab. Thank you. Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very
much. Does it work now? Okay, lovely. So, and I am going to talk about what family work looks like in my areas, and how I benefit from my psychology background in my daily work with children and families, and how that psychology background coupled with the family work has then inspired me to do my further studies in systemic practice and family therapy. And subsequently that opened doors to family and couple counselling. So the family worker role is within local authority and in the early help wing of children's services. And we provide multi-agency intervention to families with multiple complex needs. They range from mental health and physical ill health, mixed emotional, behavioral and developmental issues of a child, to living with or having fled from domestic abuse, as well as the impact of socioeconomic inequalities. Multi-agency intervention means partnership working with a variety of other agencies, such as social care, adult and child and adolescent mental health services, STEM services, schools, police, women's aid, job centre, housing, just to name a few. So the majority of referrals do come from so-called step across from social care. So we may work alongside social care, or referrals come from schools, from inclusion officers or special educational needs coordinators, as well as from nurseries and health visitors. So the scenery of the work is rather varied. We do weekly, fortnightly home visits, depending on need. We see children in primary, secondary school settings, as well as observe little ones in nurseries. And in case of developmental concerns such as speech and language delay or social communication difficulties, we then may attend with families speech and language drop-ins or pediatrician appointment, for example, whereby by the time children are seen by a pediatrician, we may have had many months of involvement with them, involving having seen the little ones in their home environment as well as in their nursery settings. So then sort of contribute to the appointment as well as provide emotional support for families, as it can be rather anxiety provoking to attend health appointment. Same applies for housing appointment, for example, where we are there to support families and also assist with social housing applications. So I think of a father the other day asked me to attend a housing appointment with him as he needed to be seen linked to his alleged antisocial behavior. And he said to me that, "Oh, Francis, can you come with me? Because I may be more able to keep my calm if you are there." So that sort of emotional support side of the job is rather important. In terms of the community settings, venue, I myself, for example, I'm based in a child and family center where we run a variety of parent-child groups. For example, myself, I'm involved with facilitating a special educational needs and disability weekly group, together with a specialist practitioner from the SEND service. And we also facilitate a variety of parenting programs. So a typical day of mine may look like starting on a home visit, then going to a school to facilitate a so-called team around the family meeting, whereby the head teacher may be there and the child's key worker and a variety of other involved professionals. Then I may go with the family to either a health appointment or other type of appointments that they need support at. As well as I then may make referrals to places or write a supporting statement or make a funds application. And I then might facilitate a 2-hour parenting program in the afternoon. And in between appointments, we are also required to do huge amount of recording. And so if I then have a super busy day, then I might crown the day with a few couple sessions or family counseling sessions with Relate in the evening. So in these jobs, I relish the opportunity to reach out to people from a great diversity of socioeconomic, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. So what we do involves supporting people towards improved health and well-being, which entails opening up space for discussion, which hopefully facilitate coping and resilience building. And ideally, together with families, we co-create a context for change. And in this process, we put special emphasis on working with family relationships and looking into complex family dynamics. And so we seek to help people to understand what sort of thoughts, beliefs, and experiences they may be bringing from their own family of origins, including cultural, political, historical, language contexts, and how understanding what sort of implicit rules, roles, and interactional patterns might be informing their current ways of managing their family of making, including parenting, that is viewed rather helpful in terms of then the ability to bring about changes if some interactional patterns or dynamics are not the most helpful at the time. And so then we help hopefully introduce a difference in the system that will make the difference. We do a lot of wishes and feelings work with children, and capturing the child's voice is the big part of family work. In terms of assessment of strengths and needs, we use so-called early help assessments, and measuring and assessing progress. We may use tools from the family pack of questionnaires. As mentioned before, in terms of the partnership working, continuously liaison with the evolved professional network system around the family is key to our job. And that involves also organizing and holding team around the family meetings, where then family support plans are drawn up to identify who gets to do what, and to sort of just see where we are in the process of our involvement with families, which might take up to 6 or 8 months. And so all in all, we seek to help people to increase productivity, employability, and social inclusion. We do referrals to other agencies, for example, trauma-focused interventions, or when there is loss in the family, or when attachment difficulties are indicated, we may make referrals to what Miriam mentioned, the video interactive guidance. When, for example, domestic abuse might be indicated, there are specific risk assessment forms that we do to map out the level of risk, and if needed, refer further on to the multi-agency risk assessment conference to again ensure a multi-agency approach and that families are appropriately safeguarded. We do loads of funds applications, and in these, so for white goods or for an amount of money to support the families in particular ways. And in this process, it's really important that we very well know the family and sort of are able to write such supporting background to our applications, which advocate for the family and capture their needs. With regards to the parenting programs, we facilitate some of them. You can see on the slide that has been found to be evidence-based and promoted in our services. And I have talked about my SEND role. So some of the psychological theories, approaches, and techniques that I draw upon in my daily work include the ones, just to mention a few on the slide. And if I think about, for example, using the attachment theory, I think about a piece of work with a mom with bipolar disorder who was at the time discharged from the mother-baby unit with her newborn, and so I then supported her for about a year. And genogram work, so mapping out her family relationships and where she comes from, revealed that where she comes from, the whole concept of bipolar disorder doesn't really exist. And generally, mental health difficulties are viewed, her words, as weakness or laziness. So it turned out that there was ever so much guilt and shame within herself about her illness. And although she was doing a wonderful job with this baby, she didn't take any credit for it. And sort of the work together entailed helping her to link the well-being and content presentation of this baby to the good quality care that she was providing. And so helping her to be able to see herself through the baby's eyes, and in terms of looking into what this good quality of care entailed, it was really helpful to draw upon the attachment theory, and in particular looking at aspects of sensitivity of responses and appropriateness. Another area, for example, the solution-focused approach that I often find myself reaching out to, brings about a case example where I worked with a 12-year-old who in the referral paperwork was described as an uncontrollable, angry young man who once required 8 policemen to handle. And so when going on my very first home visit, in no time at all, I found that there was an utmost blame-laden account and negative atmosphere which around this child and the difficulties with him, which actually he also joined the process and appeared to try to outcompete his parents and the social worker in terms of adding to his blame-laden accounts and drawing up an even more fraught and painful picture about himself. So what that might have been about is letting me know how very difficult the situation for everyone is. And so following acknowledgement of hearing that, I then proposed that we may play a little game involving a magic wand. And actually he absolutely lit up and ran upstairs and said, I actually have a magic wand, and he returned with that, and off we went using the miracle question. So I then asked how his day would look like if there was to be a miracle overnight, and all the difficulties that they were experiencing was to be all of a sudden resolved. And so the whole approach is about eliciting very detailed description of a preferred future. So the way he started was, I would get up at 10 and mess about and be very, very late for school. Now, a key thing about the problem presentation that it involved school refusal to the point whereby parents were facing prosecution. And his sort of initial response appeared like perhaps a defiant one. However, I couldn't help but celebrate the fact that he is mentioning school. In his description, school is there. Although he would be messing about and would be very late, but hallelujah, he would be at school. So I just sort of was going with the flow, saying, all right, if you were to be at school at the time when school starts, what time would you get up then? Oh, then I would wake up at 7. And then what would you be doing next? And who would be noticing? And remember, you are at your best. How would things look like? And so he also involved in his sort of detailed description, getting sweets from the corner shop. And he used specifically the word buying sweets in the corner shop, which was stark opposite to the referral paperwork, which mentioned notorious stealing. And so we then mapped out his day, and I learned so much about him this way, about how he would be staying on task. He would still be funny, and his peers would sort of appreciate his humor. However, he wouldn't be messing around. He would stay on task, and he would be actually a hardworking learner, but still easygoing. And he used to be
sorry. I'm really sorry, Frances. I'm going to have to. It's running a bit over. I'm really sorry. I could listen to this all day. It's really fascinating.
So Yes, okay, so I just close with saying that I'm not saying he went to school the next day, but report was built and my work with him could be started. And that was at that point the whole sort of mission to have another session. And that's one of the strengths of the solution-focused approach. And yes, so this is just a little summary around what family work and working systemically with families mean. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frances. That was such a wonderful insight into the really diverse type of work you can do with a psychology background. And I think your case studies really brought to life what a day in your life of your role might look like. Really fascinating to think through how we might be able to help people with our psychology backgrounds. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to now move on to questions. So I'll be coming back to you in a moment, Pamela. But for now, I'm going to ask my colleagues on the committee to do a very difficult task, which is to please, I know you've been collating the questions that have been pouring in. Please, can you select perhaps the two most standout questions that you would like to ask your panelists from the questions that have come in? So I'm going to start with committee member Holly, who was taking note of questions that came in for our first panelist, who was Jessica West, the teacher of A-level psychology. Holly, could you please let me know what questions you have for Holly, or for Jess?
Hello, yes, so lots of good questions. A few came up a couple of times. So the first question, as you didn't have a teaching qualification when you started, what experience, skills or qualities do you feel particularly helped you to secure your post?
Fantastic question. Yeah, so I'd say in answer to that, certainly having sort of the degree in psychology that I had was relevant for teaching psychology A-level. I wouldn't have been able to teach psychology A-level if I didn't have sort of that extensive background in the subject knowledge. But in terms of some of the sort of skills and qualities, I think some of the skills and qualities to become or to be a teacher are organisation. Organisation is absolutely key, especially when you're moving from one lesson to the next with very little time between it, especially when you have a huge amount of marking to do, especially when you have to keep track of which classes you've taught which lessons to, or which sort of appointments you've made with different students. So I definitely brought organisation. I'm a fairly organised person, so I'd say that is really necessary to being a teacher, as well as having a lot of patience. I mean, I needed to have plenty of patience with myself, because in the first few sort of weeks and even within the first year of being a psychology teacher, I was learning a huge amount. So I needed to stay really teachable, really sort of moldable, and able to learn from my colleagues, as well as not being too concerned, too worried about asking them questions, especially things like teacher speak. Teachers have lots of abbreviations for different things, and I constantly came across things that I didn't understand. So being able to ask questions, being organised, and being patient I would say probably the skills and qualities that I took into sort of developing, becoming a teacher.
Lovely, thank you. And the second question, do students ever come to you seeking therapy or to discuss personal problems, and how do you handle that?
Again, a great question. So yes, they do. Over my years of being a teacher, that has definitely happened. I would start by saying that I'm not a therapist at all. I might have a bit of a background in psychology and a counselling qualification, but I am not a therapist or a counsellor. So I wouldn't claim to be able to offer that to students. But I have worked closely with our pastoral worker within the sixth form. Her and I will often sort of see students on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes students will come to me with something that's been going on perhaps at home, and that they want to just offload and talk about it, and then I have a responsibility as a teacher, classroom teacher, to pass that on to the pastoral worker. Sometimes the pastoral worker has asked me to work specifically alongside a student that's got maybe a particularly difficult background. We had one student who had particularly sort of aggressive outbursts and was at risk of having to leave the sixth form because of this. And so I met with this student on a one-to-one basis once a week and just sat down and used sort of my psychological knowledge and understanding just to listen and to ask some good questions to help them to sort of reflect on their own behaviour, try and understand why those aggressive outbursts were happening. And I'm glad to say that they were that those outbursts did reduce and they were able to stay on at the sixth form. So yeah, there are quite a number of different opportunities that I've had to work with students in terms of sort of emotional or mental difficulties.
Okay, thank you. Are there 2 questions?
Thank you so much, Holly and Jess. That was really, and thank you for asking questions. They were really great questions. I'm going to ask Sarah now to pick out 2 questions that came in while Miriam and Richard were speaking. Sarah, can you pick out the 2 best ones, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So it's really hard. There were loads of questions. So I'm going to do a little kind of dodgy move and try and combine a couple if I may. There's quite a lot of questions about preparation to become an EP. So one of the questions for Miriam and Richard might be, what's the best preparation to be an EP and tips on making an application for doctorates?
I think I'm gonna ask Richard to start that question because he's fresh into the profession. So Richard, would you like to go first?
Yeah, my big tip for doing the doctorate application is look at the word count. It is a word counted application, and also look at how you can answer the questions on that application. It's great to talk about all of the different things you do as a person, but they really want to know about you as a person in relation to psychology, and also targeting your application to the universities you're applying to is also really key. So make sure you do your research, look at all the different universities' websites, ask questions of the universities, and really be thorough and use every word that you can to answer their questions. The final thing is make sure you get people to read it, make sure there's no typos and those sorts of things. In regards to experience, I got into the UEA course, so what I can say about the University of East Anglia and my friends on the course there is that there is no specific experience that makes you stand out better than another candidate. I think what it is about working with children and young people, and then thinking about what sort of psychological things have come out to you as part of that and how that could prepare you for the career as an educational psychologist. That's really what they want to see. I came through mainly a health route rather than education, and I'm here on the course. So just work with children, think about how psychology and how you could apply that skill and knowledge to working with children as an educational psychologist in the future.
Thank you. And can I ask so many questions, but another one that a little bit of a theme is, what do you believe is the impact of COVID, and what's going to be key to EP work in the future?
I think it's a question that's on many of our minds at the moment. And we're very mindful that our health colleagues have particularly spoken out to the government around their concerns around the longer term impact of the pandemic. I mean, one of the things that's coming through the research already is the increase in domestic abuse and the impact that has on children's development, their emotional, social development in their early years and in their childhood. So I think that's that is sadly kind of what we're already sort of seeing, some of the indicators that are coming through already. And it's sort of thinking, I suppose, as an educational psychologist, what our contribution is alongside others. There's many other colleagues this webinar who are also have the same concerns, and you know, working together how we can support families who may have you know, had those additional stressors in their children's life, you know, because of the pressures of the pandemic. I think it's I'm going to come back to something that Pamela said, actually, is about connection. It's, as professionals working in schools and in the communities, we're often on the front line, and it's our school colleagues who know our families best. So it's kind of establishing those trusted relationships with our school colleagues and our health colleagues who know our families best. So particularly I'm thinking about school head teachers, SENCOs, general practitioners who have that ongoing, consistent relationship with families. They notice change. They notice change in the functioning of our families and our children, and they're in the first point of contact, really. And it's taking our lead from them, you know, how we can work with them to put in support where needed. That's I think what I would say to that.
Thanks, Miriam.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I know it's very hard to keep these to 2 questions. The questions are really pouring in. We've had more than 100 questions. Stefano, if you're there, could I please ask you to select 2 questions that came in for Frances? Thank you. And for a reminder for colleagues, Frances works with families as a family counsellor as one of her roles.
Yes, we had really amazing questions, and it was difficult to. But for Frances, what are the requirements to be a family counsellor, and what professional registration are required one in the UK?
Okay, so in order to work with Relate, for example, a systemic practice course at an intermediate level is sufficient. In order to get onto a systemic course, a psychology degree in itself is not enough because it's not considered a core qualification. Core qualifications are viewed as, for example, a nursing or a social worker, which right from the start provide client contact. A psychology degree is viewed in that context rather than academic background. So then, from my point of view, I really needed my family work experience to be able to get on the systemic course. So the 2 were hand in hand. Also, I believe that family worker experience without the psychology background may have not been enough either. So these 2 worked together well. And then for then Relate, you need to also have a registration with a professional body, which at that time was for me the British Psychological Society. And so then in sort of progressing within a counselling career, it's also helpful at some point to register with the BACP, for example, the British Association for Counselling and Therapy.
And the second question is, how do you prevent the difficulties that come with your job from harming your well-being?
Could you please repeat? The line was a bit fragmented. I didn't hear the beginning.
Yes, sorry. How do you prevent the difficulties that come with your job from harming your well-being?
Okay, that is a helpful question in terms of really probably getting to know oneself in this journey as to how much you can handle. For example, with myself, I noticed that doing, for example, my counseling days, which are just I have set days for with the county council, and then other days with Relate, I can handle sort of safely from my point of view 6 sessions. And this is now that we have moved to Zoom, has turned a little more challenging. I find that sort of the Zoom way of engagement may take out more of you, because sort of there isn't that type of varied channels of information coming in. Although there is still being on camera, it does make a difference, and it feels like having become sort of harder work in terms of the mental effort.
Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. Thank you. That was wonderful. Emma, my colleague on the committee, is there any one last question you'd like to pull out to ask any of our panelists?
Yeah, hi. There's been some fantastic questions that I've been keeping an eye on throughout the day. I think maybe to finish off, it might be nice to ask all of our speakers, if anyone wants to pitch in. This came out in a few different ways, but what do you find potentially the most fulfilling in your respective careers? Is there something that kind of keeps you going back day in and day out? What is that?
We'll start with Jess, yeah?
So I think I possibly answered this at the end of my presentation, and for me, what is fulfilling is sort of being able to share knowledge and understanding about a subject that I am really passionate about. But I think for me, the thing that kind of keeps me going back every day is those moments in class where students just get it. You're going through a theory or a concept, or you're teaching them something and then they apply it to themselves, you help them to apply it to themselves, and they're suddenly like, oh, so does this mean this, and does this mean when I saw this person in the street and they were doing that this theory, we can make that make sense? And I'm like, yes, that's what it means. And so it's when they kind of have those little light bulb moments, and it's really exciting to see them get that and sort of start thinking in a more psychological way. That's just incredibly rewarding for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jess. Richard, would you like to answer the same question?
Yeah, I think the most rewarding part for me is listening to people that often don't feel heard, and then being able to take what they've said and potentially improve things for them, and particularly children, letting children be heard and advocating for them and their specific needs. So yeah, I would say listening is the real gold at the end of the rainbow in my job.
That's brilliant. Miriam, do you have anything to add to that as an educational psychologist?
Hi, yes. I mean, I would agree with everything that Rich said, taking the words right out of my mouth. It's such a privilege to, be part of the journey, working alongside families and children, and, making an impact in partnership with them. And that is the most fulfilling thing. It's a huge privilege to come alongside for a period of time and to listen to their story, and to join their story and to support them in a particular child with their family moving forward in their education. And just the other thing I would add, which I haven't really touched on this evening, is how fulfilling I find it working at the University of East Anglia, giving something back and being able to teach in a higher education setting, and being able to share my own journey, my learning, my experience with trainees who are coming through now into the profession, and seeing them become passionate about making an impact in the lives of others. So that's hugely fulfilling, and I'm really, really thankful for that.
Thank you so much. That sounds so rewarding. Frances, would you like to address the question?
Yes, so I agree with everything I've just heard, and the sort of listening, connecting aspect. And another one I quite enjoy is that I never know what's going to happen. So I may have, of course, thoughts and an idea around particular direction, and to balance that also with being always open and ready to pick up on cues and which way you are taking and responding. It's sort of always out of comfort zone. You never know how it's going to go, and therefore it requires complete full engagement and being there. But then the sort of satisfaction level is quite high, I feel. And so, yeah, it's intellectually inspiring, and just every which way, every day is a sort of a wonder around how it's gonna go.
Wow, that is a wonderful answer. Thank you. Pamela, what do you find the most fulfilling about your role?
Yeah, so I think it's the combination of that intellectual stimulation because of the difference in every day, and like the privilege of people allowing you into a relationship with them at times of like real vulnerability. It's that combination, I think.
That is really wonderful. And I think thank you to our speakers for being so joyous about their professions and showing us what it is that you love so much about your jobs. It's really inspiring to me. I wish I was a psychology student all over again. I think I'd probably follow in some of your footsteps. Thank you so much. And I think this is what the BPS does really well. It brings together the people from these different roles, all these different psychologists, and brings us together with our wonderful students who are the future of psychology. So thank you for providing us and them with an insight into what their futures might look like. For all of our delegates, we will be sending you the link to this recording within the next 2 weeks, and we really are so excited by the number of participants and how eagerly you participated with your questions. Thank you so much. We are very grateful to you, and we're very grateful to our speakers. Thank you, and we hope to see you again at another careers event soon. Thank you very much.